Joining me now are both Chris McGovern, who's campaigned for real education. A little bit later, we're going to be talking to Carolie Hickman, who's University of Bath Climate Psychology Alliance, and also a member of Extinction Rebellion. But Chris, let's start with you. Chris McGovern, Campaign for Real Education. What do you feel about this?
What do I feel? Well, I think, adults have a lot of anxieties about climate change, but we shouldn't be burdening our children with those anxieties. Our campaign often complains about low standards in our schools, but there's one league table in which we're at the very top, and that, according to the Children's Society, is on unhappiness. We're the worst in Europe for that. So burdening children with all these adult anxieties is, I think, a problem, particularly for children. We want them to have a childhood. And yes, of course, they need to be green in a sense. They need to be environmentally sound. If they're going to learn anything, I suppose I would suggest they learn about Thomas Malthus, who back in the 18th century said we're all going to be dead shortly because the population's increased and the food production can't keep up. And he was wrong. Or we could go back to the 13th century. See, I'm a historian. In the 13th century, people were going around Europe whipping themselves because they thought the world was going to end because of the Black Death. Often things work out better. So it's not all doom and gloom. And, children do deserve a childhood. So we overdo it, I think. And I also worry about teachers, because do teachers know enough about climate change? Are they going to be balanced? Are they going to have their own agenda? This is a problem.
Now, let's say teachers don't do anything about it at all. The difference between you and I when we went to school, maybe we got hold of our parents' newspaper, maybe if we were allowed, if you weren't sent to bed when the magic roundabout came on, maybe you could listen to the news, but that was it. Nowadays, if teachers say nothing about something, there is still the internet, there's still social media. So that anxiety and all of those doom and gloom and probably I'm going to stick my neck out here and say definitely most of it, or a lot of it, is way, 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 way less informed than any teacher could do at their very worst. So they're still going to be picking up this anxiety. So do teachers just pretend it's not going on, or actually tackle it with a more balanced, a more nuanced approach?
Well, they certainly need to give it a more nuanced approach. I mean, I'm a bit older than you, I suspect. So I can remember going to school in 1962, walking to school, we were talking about the end of the world then because there was going to be a nuclear strike from Russia because of the Cuban Missile Crisis. We got through all of that. The teachers didn't actually discuss it. I think teachers do have to be open with children, but not overburden them. It's not all bad in the world. And, sometimes adults are too keen to foist these anxieties onto children. Of course, children need to be given some sort of guidance, and of course, teachers can't totally ignore it. But what teachers shouldn't be doing is presenting a one-side horror story. We've got enough problems in the world without emphasising this. And as I say, it's a great sadness to me that so many children these days in Britain seem to have mental health problems. But the country in Europe with the fewest mental health problems and the happiest children, oddly enough, in Europe is Romania. A lot of poverty there. Maybe this affluent society breeds neurosis.
You've got a good point there. I think, we give our kids a lot more, or British parents tend to give their children a lot more in material goods, or want to, or judge how good a parent they are by how much, I have to agree with you. I often get very, very cross with people who have that point of view, because I had my childhood in Africa, and yet they're very, very happy, and they don't give their kids iPads and phones and things like that. They have to give them attention, and they're involved in society. I'm still waiting for Caroline to get online, but let's come back to that point. Dealing with children's anxieties, there are two ways to do it, as you say: foist our anxieties onto them, or say, look, this is what you're going to hear, this is what you're going to see online, this is how you can deal with it. Here are some maybe tools to deal with it, what you can do on a certain level, what you can't do. And this is where you can go for more proper information, rather than teachers are now having to combat whatever's out there on the internet as well, aren't they?
Well, they are bombarded with information and doom and gloom stories. There's no doubt about that. But, I've taught for 35 years, and I've taught 5-year-olds, and I've taught 16, 18-year-olds. But when you're teaching young children in particular, fairy tales, and they're under scrutiny now and they're being banned, but fairy tales tell us about a nasty world. You have wolves eating grandmothers and stuff, horrible stories, but they allow children to enter a sort of fantasy world. They can see there is a dark side to humanity. So we should boost the telling of fairy tales in infant school, certainly. And we need to be honest with children, but tell them about what's happened in the past and tell them how we've got through crises in the past and tell them basically human ingenuity gets us through most crises. Yes, it is a difficult one. They can do a little bit. If we told them the whole truth, we would say, you can forget it. Because if in the UK we go carbon neutral, it doesn't make any difference. We produce less than 1% of the world's pollution. So it's China, it's the United States, it's Brazil, it's India, the other countries. So if we're going to be really honest with us, we can all get doom and gloom, but we can't go on like that. These children need to have a future. They need to be given optimism. And yes, I say Thomas Malthus is your man. He told us we'll all be dead by now, and he was wrong.
Well, let's bring in Carolie Hickman here, University of Bath Climate Psychology Alliance and a member of Extinction Rebellion. We should add that as well. Caroline, what are your thoughts on this?
Thank you. It's very interesting to join you. Thank you for addressing this question. It's fascinating. Yes, humanity has dealt with many crises in the past. Humanity's never dealt with a crisis on this scale before. We reassure ourselves by saying, well, when we get over this, when we get beyond this, everything will be all right. The problem is that isn't effective reassurance for something on the scale of the climate crisis, because there's no part of the planet that will not be touched by the climate crisis. So actually, when children and young people are speaking out and telling us how afraid they are, they're very healthy. Psychologically, this is incredibly healthy. For us to be giving them a different message to that than, yes, your response is healthy, is actually making the damage far worse for them, because this is older people really denying young people's emotional and cognitive experience of what's going on in the world. We measure mental health by looking at our capacity to respond to external reality. And external reality tells us that things are getting significantly worse. And so we have to actually respond in terms of reality rather than false reassurance, naive reassurance, because it's a systemic problem. It's a worldwide
Caroline,
problem.
let me just ask you, you know, looking at mental health and looking at that it now is affecting children's mental health, do we tell them, your mental health's being affected, but hey, that's healthy? But is there some balance about what you can do to do something? I know the University of East Anglia ran a course for 6 weeks, and I remember back when one of my daughters, were at school, they did a picking up paper campaign, or they felt they were doing something, that they weren't hurtling towards doom without any brakes on. Isn't there a way of teaching children, yes, this is an issue, but yes, this is what you can do, and somehow, you know, using that rather than just saying, oh, you know, being anxious about the climate change, being depressed about it, hey, that means you're healthy?
Well, actually, I would say to anybody who's feeling eco-anxiety, you're only feeling this because you care. And you should feel proud that you care. So I would reframe it in that sort of way and say, I would worry about the people who weren't anxious. As far as I'm concerned, that anxious response is a healthy response. Then you're absolutely right, Trisha. What you need to do is turn that anxiety into a form of positive action, but not dismiss the anxiety in the first place. So you're absolutely right. That positive action is really, really valuable, but don't dismiss the emotions behind it, or the way that children and young people are thinking about their futures, because that's disempowering and it's disenfranchising them. They're not old enough.
Let me bring Chris in here. Chris, Caroline, has Caroline got a point there?
Well, look, Caroline's well-meaning and very sensible. What I would say to Caroline, if you start telling children the truth, we're all finished, because this country can do nothing about climate change. We can set an example. That's what we would say. But look, it's not Britain. It is China. It is the United States. It's Brazil. It's India. We can do very little. That's the truth. If you tell the truth to children, yes, we are all doomed. That's an awful message to send. So I suggest that with young children in particular, we don't face up to that. We don't tell them about that, because we will probably carry on. At the end of the day, we've had people forecasting disaster for many centuries, and for all sorts of reasons. We tend to have ingenuity.
I have to ask you a question, and I need to interrupt you because I can't cope with listening to this. You're actually advocating that we should lie to children.
I'm advocating that if you tell children... When I was at school and we had the nuclear missile crisis...
You're advocating that we should lie to children. That's what you're saying.
Well, I'm afraid
I have to ask you about this.
Thought my words I'm not saying you lie to children. You're the one who's saying you should lie because
you're saying don't tell them the truth.
Not what you're saying. The whole truth is that this country can do.
No, Chris, I'm really sorry. You've actually just said do not tell them the truth.
You won't tell the children the truth, but the truth is not what you're saying. The truth is there's a way out. There isn't a way.
So hang on. Let me come, Caroline. You're saying that you should tell children. Are you saying that you should tell children the unvarnished, untarnished truth?
The thing is, you've got children. Children are not stupid. They're online. They're researching this for themselves. They don't need us to tell them a truth or a lie. They're finding out for themselves. They're really not stupid. To tell children, untruths around this, and actually we're arguing about truth and lies, when really it's about how we talk to children about this, not the detail of what we say. We've got to talk to them in ways that is tolerable, that is understandable, that is wise, and that is thoughtful. Absolutely. But we also have to support children with how they then feel about this and what they then think about it. That is a respectful way to talk with children. The last thing we should do is pretend to children that what is going on is not what's going on. I'm going to quote a child on this because we should be listening to them. I'm going to quote a young woman who I asked, how do we talk to you about this without traumatizing you, terrifying you? And she said, tell us the truth, because if you're not telling us the truth, you're lying to us. And if you lie to us, we can't trust you. If we can't trust you, we can't talk to you about how we feel. And then we're in even double trouble. So we can't traumatize children further by leaving them to deal with the climate change problems and climate anxiety, and then lie to them on top of that. That's a moral injury. That is child abuse. This is the worst thing you could possibly do.
So are you saying it's about, are you agreeing that with part of what Chris said, it's about age-appropriate information, giving children, at different ages, the amount of information that they can cope with in a way they can cope with them? And you're saying that is different from lying to them?
This is extraordinary, though, Trisha, isn't it? Because it's as if we have to give them the information. They're online. They're educating themselves. They're really not stupid. So they're able to research this for themselves. So they go online, they read about it, and then they go and talk to their parents, and their parents say, oh no, it's not that bad. What is that going to do to a child's mental health? They'll be left feeling confused, abandoned, betrayed. We need to of course we need to tell them the truth, but my research is with children as young as 5. And children as young as 5 have a perfectly good capacity to understand some of the realities of what's going on in the world around them. And they know when parents are lying.
So, Chris, you and I were talking about this earlier, that they're going to learn stuff or going to go online and see stuff, a lot of which probably isn't true anyway. So teachers might as well confront it head on with the truth.
Because we come back to this huge question, what is truth? I mean, we're talking to Meghan Markle, she has her truth, Harry has his truth, I have my truth, and Caroline has her truth. Whose truth are we going to teach?
Not when it comes to the climate crisis. 95% of scientists agree.
We are much more climate aware than anywhere else. Our children are more aware of climate change than anywhere else, and they're also the most unhappy. That's what we do.
But are the two inextricably linked? I mean, they could be the most unhappy because of other reasons. It might have nothing to do with climate change. It might be the fact that we've got rid of organisations like Sure Start, and we don't have good as good early learning systems as other countries. I mean, that is something that's been established when it comes to mental health. Are we using climate change as the reason, or is it? It's just that our children don't have enough coping strategies because we don't have robust enough an early education system. So when things that come up like climate change, like war, I'm sure kids are very scared about war, reading about what's going on in the Ukraine all the time. Is it more about that?
Well, you're right. There are multiple pressures affecting children's mental health at the same time as desperately awful cuts in mental health provision and support for children. And there's also economic pressure, and there's also political pressure, and the Public Order Bill, which is silencing children from speaking out about things that frighten them more and more and more. We're criminalizing children and young people's distress. But really,
Chris, hang on, Chris. Let's just hear Chris on that.
Dangerously close to denying.
I've taught for 35 years. I have taught 5-year-olds. And what I would say is that, generally speaking, young children can be very positive. But when they go into a lesson about climate change or about a mental health issue, they come out more depressed. We have to answer the question, why is it in the UK?
That is not true. I work with children and young people on these issues.
You see, I can't get a word in education. This is the posing down of freedom of speech. I would like to talk. I can't talk.
Hang on, Caroline, just let Chris finish.
You taught children about climate change.
Caroline will not allow anybody else to have an opinion. That I find quite...
Hang on, I can't hear both of you at once. We can't hear both of you at once. So, Caroline, if you just let Chris finish his point before we come back to you. Chris, go on.
The only point I would like to make, very sanely, is that Caroline needs to allow other people to express an opinion, and children need to understand as well. There are different opinions.
Okay, so it's about teaching children different opinions. Finally, Caroline, would you agree with that you teach children, well, this is what scientists say, however, this is what, another body says?
No, this is dangerously close to climate denial. This is dangerously close to saying we are not really in the mess that we're in. This is lying to children. This is misinformation, disinformation. Exxon has been doing this for decades. This is profoundly dangerous to children's mental health. This is absolutely the worst thing you could possibly do.
Well, we've got to leave it there, but I'm sure this is just the start of it. I'm sure it's just the start of it. Thank you both.